Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, you got a lot of good questions that came in from some of your athletes. And I know you have some athletes competing this weekend, as I do too. Do you feel
Yes.
like they're ready? Like
Yes.
physically and nutritionally?
Yes, definitely ready. They've got Galveston
Mhm.
this weekend
Yeah,
on Sunday. Yeah.
yeah.
So
Oh
it's
my
going to be a big
gosh.
day. There's also athletes here racing Cap 10K.
Yes.
So
I have to say, I need to be better about racing. I'm going to say loosely shorter distances, right? Because for some athletes, like, well, long distance is
yeah,
relative.
signing up for some of those
Yeah.
shorter distance races instead of the longer ones.
Yeah. That was something my coach recommended. And you may have, similar or different opinions, but he said, basically work on getting faster at those shorter distances relative to a marathon distance.
Hmm.
But there's only so many hours in a day.
I know. Well, and then also they're probably putting you through some sort of training block to
Yeah.
gain that faster, like fast twitch muscle, and strength. There's definitely changes in how you train for a short distance versus long. So,
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of taking a break right now personally. So I came off my marathon and just trying to be like a normal
I think,
human for a while.
yeah,
So
that's okay.
yeah.
You know what?
Yeah.
I always say that triathlon and running, it's always going to be there for you. Like it's not going away. So and like life just kind of ebbs and flows,
It does.
right? And so we have seasons where we're really training for something and you've got that goal and that peak, and then other times where maybe your personal or work life is taking over more of your time and you're just
Mhm.
trying to keep active and live a healthy lifestyle, and that's okay
Yeah.
too, and that's
Sure.
kind of where I'm at right now as well.
Yeah. I love that. Yes, for sure. So yeah, I love that mindset. So let's dive into some of our questions. And for those who can't join today, hopefully they can come back and listen to us. We'll try to save this. Hopefully it'll go through. Um, and yeah, does it sound good to you?
Yeah, let me start you off with a nutrition question that some athletes have asked me. So, what are the most common nutrient deficiencies that you see in endurance athletes, and how can they be prevented?
Awesome. I actually thought that was a pretty big word when you sent that question over to me. Not
I think you're a
everybody.
PT.
Oh, okay. I was like, man, that's really awesome, like a nutrient deficiency. So I thought that was great. But three of them that I see, and it varies, right? But three big ones that I see are going to be iron, omega-3, and vitamin D. Iron deficiency is a big one just in the general population, not to mention just athletes who, one, need more iron to deliver that oxygen to our working muscles. And also, our body is just using more nutrients in general, right? And so, our
Right.
overall needs are increased, at least during heavy training cycles, obviously gearing up for a race. So, that ebbs and flows, just like we were saying with our training. But female athletes, especially if they have heavy menstrual cycles, that's another contributor too, right? They're losing a lot of blood
Yeah.
through their menstrual cycle and also have an increased need. But to prevent a nutrient deficient and iron deficiency, number one, we want to eat enough protein. And for those who eat animal sources of protein, such as, beef, chicken, fish, those kinds of foods, it's pretty easy as long as we're eating enough protein. Versus our plant-based eaters, maybe it's going to take a little bit more intention. We can focus on our iron-rich plant-based foods and then combine them with vitamin C food sources, so maybe eating something like an iron fortified cereal with a side, like an orange on the side, right? So some sort of vitamin
Right.
C food on the side. So the vitamin
Yeah.
C can help you absorb that iron more efficiently.
I was going to say that's
Um,
one thing I had to pay attention to was that when I had iron deficiency, I was in high school. And the doctor said, make sure that you take vitamin C along with
Mhm.
iron with the
Right.
absorption, right?
Well, I'm glad you said that. Take it with it. So, are you referring to a supplement?
Um, so at the time, that's what my general practitioner had recommended.
Hmm.
But now, looking into more food
Yes.
choices to supplement that with, because at that time I was intentionally underfueling. And so
Yeah.
I think my GP didn't know that at the time, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
No, and I mean, supplements definitely have a time and a place. And if we are deficient, a supplement probably is going to be, well, it's going to be your quickest way to fix that deficiency. In the meantime, we want to make sure that we're working on our diet to, sustain that. But yes, so taking a supplement, but I would recommend working with a doctor or a dietitian, during that time, and don't continue taking a supplement, after. So you need to retest your iron level. So it's a big one. So to prevent it, we should be testing at least every 6 months, and that's the same for our vitamin D and our omega-3. But the challenge with the omega-3s is so the blood work that we need for our omega-3 status isn't readily available at our doctor. So you're going to need to use something like Omega Quant. And to have the level that we need for just health protection and overall health, or if we have any, obviously cyclists out there who are at risk for head injury, like if you fall, or anybody who's at risk for head injury, um, we definitely want to make sure we have that optimal level. But, the American Heart Association recommends eating fatty fish at least twice a week, but for a lot of people, that's just not enough. So, a lot of times it does require a high quality third party tested supplement, which is kind of a whole nother conversation that we probably can't dive into today. But if anybody has questions, just send them over, because omega-3 supplements aren't the same. And so, but yeah, supplementing, and then also just emphasizing those fatty fish throughout the week if you can. And then vitamin D, same thing, test. Um, we can try to get sunshine, which is the best source, but a lot of times we wear sunscreen and clothing. I kind of joke about that. Most of us aren't walking around, um,
Right.
without clothes on outside, and we're
Yeah.
told to wear sunscreen.
Right.
So a lot of times that is a supplement, a vitamin D supplement. So
Okay.
testing for all three of those though, and then emphasizing foods and supplements as needed. So
Yeah. So, do you recommend people go to their primary care doctor to get tested for that, or is there a specific practitioner that can test for those deficiencies?
yeah, so you can test through your doctor. That's a really great question. You can. Now, the caveat there is that what they draw for iron levels is not usually going to be comprehensive enough to catch an actual iron deficiency related to what kind of demands our body's placing, or we're placing on our body. So, for example, in your standard blood draw, you may have hemoglobin and hematocrit, but we're not testing our ferritin level. And so we need to have our hemoglobin, we need to have our iron tested, we need to have our ferritin level tested, and then sometimes like our other things that are kind of fancier that we may need for further diagnosis. But a general lab panel usually won't catch it until there's a really big problem. So there are other ways to test it, such as, for example, like athlete blood test is one of my favorites that I use and recommend. Um, Also with vitamin D, the level, that is going to come through on that clinical reference range, which is usually a 30 or a level of 30 or above. And if you're, we really recommend at least a level of 55. I'd really love to see, 60 to 75, but you're not going to get flagged if your level is just above 30, which isn't enough for, you know, overall bone health and protection, stress fracture protection and immunity and everything else. So
Right.
To answer your question, yes, you can test through your doctor, but the reference ranges aren't necessarily applicable for athletes and may not be comprehensive enough.
Right. And I think it's important that if you are using your primary care doctor, that you should get blood work done every year. But I think you need to advocate for yourself as well, because most
Yes.
primary care physicians, they see kind of people who are not as healthy, and then you come in and you're healthy and they're like, oh, this is easy, and they may not
Right.
get all of the right labs. So you
I
need to advocate for yourself to tell them, I need certain labs for the endurance athlete.
I totally agree. Yes, we are kind of the easy ones, and you know, not that the doctors aren't doing their job, right? They're
Right.
looking for disease, and we're looking for, sure, obviously we want to support performance, but what our body needs is going to be different than preventing a disease state, if that makes
Right.
sense. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely advocating for yourself. And if you don't get the answers that you're looking for, then you definitely just want to reach out to another practitioner that can kind of look through a different performance lens slash health, right? So,
Exactly.
like I said, I'm doing things performance based, but always with health in mind as well. So,
Exactly. Yeah. Well, let's move on to the next question.
yeah.
So one question I had gotten about strength training is how to implement it into my training plan, and how often do I need to do it to see results. And so typically a recommendation for strength training is 2 to 3 days a week. But when you're starting to train for triathlon, especially those longer distance triathlon events, it can be really difficult to try and fit it into your schedule. And so, what I like to do for my athletes is schedule 2 strength training days a week. I think that's a great happy medium. The workouts don't have to be longer than 30 minutes at a time, especially if you don't have a lot of time, but something is better than nothing to at least maintain, to activate the correct muscles that you need, and to make a little bit of strength gains.
Yeah.
And so, if you can fit in 30 minutes twice a week, along with your swim, bike, run, and also taking recovery days here and there, I think that's a great way to prevent injuries while you're training for a long distance event.
I love
I
that.
have, yeah, and each time you're strength training, you really want to incorporate things like, um, you know, some body weight strength, adding in some barbell or dumbbell work, like free weight type of strengthening exercises. But you also don't want to forget plyometrics. That is really important, again, for bone health. So increasing that load and getting that consistent jumping, loading to your bones is really important, along with making sure you have enough of the right nutrients in your system. So I like to add that into some of the strength training. If anyone needs some guidance on how to strength train for running, specifically, I do have a Strength for Runners program. It's just 3 days a week for 30-minute sessions, and you can even stretch it out to 2 days a week for 30-minute sessions for a little bit longer. But when I create a strength training program for runners or triathletes, all of the exercises are very specific to runners, triathletes. They're all functional movements. They're dynamic. They're using a lot of free weights. So a lot of these exercises you can actually do at home if you have a set of dumbbells and some resistance bands, as long as they're heavy enough. And then for those athletes that really do like to go to the gym and use some of the machines and use a little bit more of like the then I create workouts for that as well. So some of my athletes, I'll do 1 day a week, you go to the gym, 1 day a week, you have it at home. Or both of those days, if you go to the gym, you can kind of pair it with your swims. Maybe go do your swim, then do the gym after, or vice versa. It just depends on how fatigued you're going to be.
I
But
agree.
that's how I like to fit it
It's
in.
difficult to fit it in for sure, especially as the volume increases. But it's like so important, Strength training is so important.
Yes.
Um,
It's just 3 days a week for
yeah, and so, but it's so important. It's essential. So,
it really is. I honestly like for my personal strength training, I have a good idea of the basic movements that I really want to do, like push, pull, hinge, squat, lift, carry, all those kind of movements. Um, but I just kind of wing it on the fly for my own training because otherwise, if I'm constantly looking at something and I don't know, for me, I change it up each time
yeah,
and that keeps it interesting for me. Otherwise, I get bored. And I like to
sure.
change it up each time for my athletes too. I keep it relatively consistent because that's how you grow and gain. But little things here and there, do this instead of that this time,
Right. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely strength train. Right now, I'm doing a lot of it actually, because like I said,
It's
I'm not
great.
training for a race. So
Yeah.
I really wanted to emphasize strength training while I didn't have that same cardio load. And, I'll be 40 this year. So kind of thinking along those lines as well.
Bone health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So wonderful. Great. Well, if anybody has any questions, hopefully they'll reach out to you on that.
Yeah. Let's move
So
on. The
yeah.
next one we had gotten is what do I eat race day morning when my nerves suppress my appetite?
That's a great, great one. So ideally, we are practicing our pre-race breakfast throughout training. So that means we need to have a plan, right? I think that not having a plan adds, well, I don't think, I know, not having a plan and knowing what you're going to do on race morning, that in itself creates anxiety, right? So we wake up, well, maybe the day before, all of a sudden, we're like, oh my goodness, what exactly does my timeline look like? What am I going to do in the morning? What should I eat tomorrow? And sometimes athletes wake up on race morning and think, gosh, what am I supposed to eat? And so we should be practicing our pre-race nutrition, weeks before race day, which is why I do, race day nutrition planning, which includes pre-race. And the way I recommend it is, or the way I write my plans is I include a 1 hour, a 2 hour, and a 3 hour pre-race plan, which means they each build on each other. And we can use that 1 hour plan before our either early morning sessions or when we have, we're low on, have very little time. The 2 hour race plan I would use on our weekend long sessions. And then I would, recommend practicing that 3 hour race plan, which would usually be race day, at least 1 or 2 times or however often that makes sense for you. But race day, typically I'm recommending like a 3 hour plan simply because of logistics, especially if it's a bigger race. Um, and so, otherwise, especially for triathlon, you have all of your gear and everything that you're trying to check in and like carrying all of our food. So it's just easier if we back the timeline up, but it's more food, which isn't, super fun. But so I guess that's a long answer to the question, which was, what should I eat when my nerves are suppressed? Well, have a plan. That's the first one. But otherwise, we want to stick to familiar foods. And generally, they're going to be higher carbohydrate foods because our carbohydrate needs are going to be really high on race day morning. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have protein and fat. So, familiar, easily digestible foods. So, for example, if you are used to eating a bagel and fruit, we could start there. If you're used to eating oatmeal with maybe fruit mixed in and or pancakes or waffles with some syrup on there, something like that. Versus we wouldn't want something super high in fat and very, very high in protein. So an example would maybe be like if we had, I'm trying to think of like a very high breakfast fatty food. If you went to go eat at a fast food restaurant because we didn't plan, and we pull in and get some sort of, you know, omelet with, toast and lots of butter on it, which is fine if you're used to that. But if there's too much fat in there and too much protein and not enough carbs, then that's not going to serve you well, at the race itself. So avoiding super high fat and super high protein foods, or too much of it, right, before your race. Emphasizing familiar carbohydrate foods that you're used to, but ideally we have a plan, really is the bottom line. And when I'm writing those plans, I am including fat and protein, but it's going to all be relative to your body weight and your individual needs. And that's something that you would have been practicing, versus if you just wake up and decide to eat something high in fat and then high in protein and not enough carbs. That's going to be something different, the way your body responds to it, and as well as with the timing. So
Right.
I don't know. It's a
Exactly.
long question, long answer.
That's okay. So let's see. Let's move on to the next one. Tips on training when you're busy and you have little kids at home. So here are a few tips that I do because I do have a young kid at home. One thing is trying to incorporate them into your training. That way they are seeing what you're doing and sometimes they get inspired by it. So one tip, especially to get some of those rides in, is to do a lot of rides on the indoor trainer. It's not ideal, but it is a way to get in some of those higher intensity workouts in a safe space. If your kid is old enough that they can go in their playroom on their own, or maybe like set up TV or set them up with something to eat or drink ahead of time, that will sustain them for maybe at least 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and set up your bike trainer within that same room. Another thing you could do, if you have one of those like, oh, what are they called? Like a playpen of some sort, you can put that up. If your baby's like, around 1 or something like that, let them play a little bit while you're riding. If you need to take breaks, that's perfectly fine. I mean, I had where I would ride and have her in the playpen, and then she'd be hungry, and I just grab her and feed her, and then when we're done, get back to riding. So you just have to learn to be a little flexible in your training and know that it's not going to be 100%. Like, you're not going to complete that workout the way it maybe should have been 100%, and that's okay. At least you did something. Another big component to training with little kids is having a support system. So making sure that you have like your spouse or your parents or someone or some sort of childcare set up for when you need to get out on the road and get in a slightly longer ride, or those longer runs that you may need to get in. It's really important to have that support system and making sure that you're taking the time for yourself and not letting that mom guilt or dad guilt get in the way of you taking some time for yourself. I'd say another aspect is if you can tolerate running with the jogging stroller, that's a great way to bring them along. If you are the type that likes to have the bike trailer set up, that's a great way to get a work in as well. Get your kids outside and they enjoy it. One other thing that's great in our neighborhood, there's a track workout every Monday night, and there's a bunch of parents that run, and it's enclosed, and so we just let all the kids kind of run around in the field, and they watching. It's also the rest of the group, they're all watching as well and helping out. It's a really great community, so that's a way to get involved too. If you have kids who are school aged and they have school programs, is there a way that while they're doing their soccer practice, can you go run around the trail that's in the same park? Things like that. And then the obvious but not so obvious, just the really early morning workout to get it all done ahead of time. So
I'll add to that on those early morning sessions, where nutrition is a big component if you're going to be one of those. That's always been my strategy is the early morning. And so, proper fueling around those is essential.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Maybe using the 1 hour plan or a little bit less.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely using a 30-minute to 1 hour fueling, and then if it's a high intensity, then we're going to go ahead and implement our fueling plan
Yes.
during that session. And then with that, having your recovery plan in place, so that you can go straight, whether that's taking it with you, like if you're leaving your house obviously to go do a long run or a long
That's
ride,
what I do.
having it in your car is what I
Mhm.
recommend. I know this wasn't part of the question, but having it in the car to start that recovery before you get back home to your family.
Yeah.
So anyway, little things like
Yes.
that
And then
too.
coming up with some sort of like really quick breakfast idea. So that way, or plan that out or something. Always have a plan for when you come back because you are doing the hard work and you don't want to ruin it by not recovering properly with correct fuel.
Exactly. For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. The planning, especially just around those sessions is so important. And I know it kind of might sound intimidating. I think the word plan sounds somewhat intimidating or maybe restrictive in some ways. But, when you get into what you're doing is not what the typical person is doing. And
Mm-hmm.
so, you want to feel good during and after that session, but also the rest of the day, especially if you have to go to work or you have a family. So just having a plan helps remove or alleviate those anxieties and just makes you feel better overall. And then also keeps you from getting injured.
Oh, yes,
So,
definitely.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's go into the
Yeah.
next question. Is there anything different for nutrition if I'm racing in the humidity or races close to the beach, or what do I do with this Texas heat, coming in now in April?
Mhm. Yeah, hydration, regardless of the temperatures, honestly, is the foundation of any kind of fueling and hydration plan or fueling plan that I create. Because if you don't have the proper blood flow, then we're not going to utilize the best nutrition plan. So that would be regardless of the weather, right? So if it's hot, regardless if it's hot, cold, humid, or combination of all three, because we're in Texas and that can happen. It can be, cold at the beginning, become humid, and then, warm up. It's just all kinds of creative combinations of weather. But humidity specifically presents challenges, right? Because, we sweat to cool off our body temperature. And so, because there's already humidity in the air, that sweat can pool on your skin, which means it's not going, or like collect on your skin, which means it's not going to cool off your body as effectively as it would ordinarily. So, your body temperature can rise, which will increase your sweat loss. And this, will down cascade to potential more dehydration and then electrolyte imbalance, because when we sweat, we lose fluid and we also lose electrolytes. So we need to keep our fluid replacement and our electrolyte in place, replacement in check. So hydrating early and often, I think that one of the biggest mistakes I see, and again, this is going to be regardless of heat or humidity or any kind of weather conditions, is we may start, our session or our race feeling good and feeling hydrated, or what we believe is hydrated. And because of that, we don't really drink, right? And then all of a sudden we feel thirsty or think to ourselves, oh, I should probably drink something. But we should be starting early and often, especially if you plan to fuel effectively. So we can't, again, just take in those gels or chews or whatever it is that you intend to take in if we don't have proper hydration. And we're not going to backtrack out of that. So, if we find ourselves in a place dehydrated at some point during our session or a race, we can't just take in extra to reverse that at that time. So it's important to begin, like I said, early and often, then have a plan in place with your or your fluid replacement needs. And that's an easy sweat rate, sweat volume test. We should run those tests at, through different conditions. So for example, if you want to know kind of how or be able to predict how your body responds in humid weather, if it's a hot and humid day or whatever the combination is that day, you can go out for a 1-hour run or a 1-hour ride, weigh yourself before and after without clothes on. And then, if you take in fluids, we're going to measure that fluids. But I have a spreadsheet that I can share for that, and you just type in all that information. It will tell you how much fluid you lost per hour. And then from that, you can determine how much fluid to replace. And we don't always fully replace how much we lose. So knowing your sweat rate, the more you lose, the less we actually replace, simply because it's just not possible or it's not practical.
Right.
So yeah, staying on top of your fluid replacement and your electrolyte replacements early and often, and then sipping your fluids before you take in that gel and or after. So that can also kind of be a little trigger reminder to, hey, I need to hydrate, if you take in some fluid before and then take in your gel or your chew and then take in another, sip of fluid afterwards.
Yeah,
So
I think that's so important. The early and often is something that a lot of triathletes and runners don't
yeah,
do, just because they
yes,
don't think about it and they don't have that thirst from the very
yes,
beginning. And
right,
so it's so hard to make yourself take that in when you're not really feeling thirsty yet. But then when
yes,
you are feeling thirsty, that's when it's like, well, maybe I should have had more before,
sure.
try to load it up in the beginning. I think the mindset for some people, or for a lot of people, is like, well, why do I need to take that in right now? I have the energy.
Everything's going well right now. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And then it
yeah.
catches up to you.
Well, and that's the other thing too in the humid environment too, is your thirst, cue actually may be
Mhm.
suppressed,
Oh,
which obviously is
yeah.
another, hindrance to the desire to hydrate. If you don't feel thirsty, you are going to be
Yeah.
less likely to drink. Um, and then, then you become so dehydrated, we're now thirsty. And if you are an athlete who has high electrolyte loss and we start
Mhm.
chugging water, plain water, then we can also disturb our electrolyte balance. So it can actually make it worse, right? So we're diluting our
Right.
bloodstream with fluid that doesn't contain electrolytes. And so in some way you can be dehydrated with enough fluid on board if we're not also replacing those electrolytes. It's
That's
all
right. That's
kinds
so
of
important.
hydration considerations.
Yeah. There's so much, and that's why it's
Yeah.
so individual for everyone.
It is,
Yeah.
yes. Fluid loss can be, usually when I'm doing a presentation, I'll hold up one of those 16-ounce water bottles, and then I also have a 3-liter water
Mhm.
bottle, like that I got from the grocery store. And so, just as a visual reference, I'll hold up the half-liter in my 3-liter bottle and say, some athletes lose less than half a liter, and some athletes lose more than 3 liters of fluid per hour. Those are very different hydration plans. And if you are an athlete who is losing less than half a liter
Yeah.
and taking in too much water, that can be extremely dangerous.
Right.
Um, Females, smaller bodies are going to generally, not always, generally have less fluid loss. Um, and then on the other hand, if you're losing over 3 liters of fluid and you're taking in less than half a liter, that's a big problem. So
Yeah.
knowing your sweat rate is a big key to knowing how to hydrate effectively. Not
Right.
to mention
Exactly.
your electrolyte loss. So,
And Jenna, you do sweat tests, so I would love you to
mhm.
come to Austin sometime.
Yes,
Maybe we can set it up with some athletes,
yes,
get you scheduled and one afternoon do some sweat tests. And that way in
yes.
hot Texas heat, they'll know a little bit better how to take in that hydration.
Yes, for sure. So the sweat testing that I do, it's not the patches that some athletes may be familiar with.
Mhm.
I use precision hydration, and that's going to tell the athlete how much sodium they lose per liter of fluid loss, which is why we need to
That's
know our
great.
sweat rate, right? We need
Yeah.
to know if we're losing half a liter, 3 liters, how much are we losing, so we can estimate what our fluid loss is during certain conditions. So what you lose in July in Texas is probably going to be different if we actually have a winter in December or January.
Right.
Your fluid loss is going to look very different in those two conditions. So yeah, we need to know how much you're losing. And then, the way I do sweat sodium testing is you just have to test that one time. So we don't have to
Right.
continually apply those patches and retest, which can be inconvenient, right? When we're just busy
Hmm.
athletes. So
Right. Exactly. Okay. Well, I
yeah, I
think
think we covered a
that's
lot.
we covered a lot. We got a lot more questions, so maybe we'll do a recurring live, throughout
Yes.
the next couple of months. I think that would be great.
I think that's great too because you sent over quite a few and time goes by really